"You don't belong in this building." The words were spoken softly, almost politely, but they carried the weight of a locked door. Outside the glass entrance of Whitmore Holdings, rain poured over the city streets, turning every sidewalk into a mirror of gray skies and rushing headlights. And standing beneath the cold shadow of the towering corporate building was a woman in a worn brown coat, holding a small leather folder against her chest, waiting for someone to believe she had a reason to be there. Nobody knew her name yet. Nobody knew that in a few hours, that same name would stop a board meeting, silence a room full of powerful people, and reveal a truth that had been hidden for years. But before the world discovered who she was, one ordinary man saw something everyone else ignored: her humanity. Ethan Walker had spent most of his morning repairing a broken heating valve in the basement of the building. At 39 years old, he knew every sound the old structure made: the hum of the elevators, the rattle of the pipes, the quiet complaints of machines that needed attention before anyone noticed they were failing. It was the kind of work people depended on but rarely remembered. Ethan was used to that. He was a single father who measured life in simple things: paychecks, school lunches, the small smile his daughter gave him before he left for work every morning. He did not need applause. He just needed to keep moving forward. When he stepped into the lobby carrying his toolbox, he noticed the woman near the entrance. Her coat was soaked at the shoulders. A few drops of rain fell from her hair onto the marble floor. The receptionist looked at her carefully, then looked away. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, but her voice already suggested the answer she expected. The woman lifted her folder. "I have a meeting with the board." A brief silence followed. Then the receptionist glanced at the expensive marble walls, the polished desks, and the security guards standing nearby. "Do you have an appointment confirmation?" The woman paused. "I believe my name is enough." But the receptionist did not smile. She looked uncomfortable.
"I'm sorry, Mom.
"We have strict procedures." Ethan watched from a distance. He had seen this before. Not the same situation, but the same look. The moment someone decided another person was less important before hearing their story. The woman stepped back toward the entrance as another gust of rain pushed through the opening doors. Ethan walked over quietly. "Here." She looked surprised as he held out a clean towel from his maintenance cart. "You should dry off before you get sick." She stared at the towel, then at him. "You don't know who I am." Ethan gave a small shrug. "No, I don't." He looked toward the rain outside. "But I know you're standing here freezing." For the first time that morning, the woman's expression softened. Not because someone recognized her. Not because someone feared her. Simply because someone noticed her. "Thank you," she said quietly. Ethan nodded and returned to his work. He did not ask for her name. He did not ask why she was there. He did not expect anything in return. But as she opened the visitor log and picked up the pen, something changed. The woman slowly wrote her name: Clara Whitmore. The receptionist barely glanced at it. The security guard looked away. But across the lobby, the board secretary's assistant happened to walk past the desk. Her eyes stopped on the page. Her breathing changed. Because beneath the rainwater and the worn coat was a signature she had seen only in archived company records. A signature connected to a name that had disappeared from the public eye. And suddenly, the quiet lobby no longer felt ordinary. The lobby had changed in a matter of seconds. Not because anyone had raised their voice. Not because anything dramatic had happened. It changed because one simple signature had created a question nobody wanted to answer. Clara Whitmore stood beside the visitor desk, unaware that the quiet act of writing her name had just awakened a memory buried inside the company archives. The board secretary's assistant, Melissa Grant, stared at the visitor log with a nervous expression. She looked again at the signature, then at Clara standing near the entrance in her old brown coat. It did not make sense. The woman in front of her looked like someone who had spent the morning walking through the rain. But the name on that page belonged to a family that had shaped the entire company. "Excuse me," Melissa finally said. Clara turned around. "Yes." Melissa hesitated. She wanted to ask 100 questions, but she knew better than to speak before confirming the facts. "Are you here for the Whitmore Holdings board meeting?" Clara nodded calmly. "Yes." Before Melissa could respond, another voice interrupted. "Is there a problem?" Adrian Cole walked across the lobby with the confidence of someone who was used to controlling every room he entered. As the acting chief executive officer, he had spent the last 2 years presenting himself as the steady hand keeping the company successful. His suit was perfectly pressed. His smile was professional. His words were carefully chosen. "No problem at all," Adrian said, looking toward Clara. Then his eyes moved to her coat, her simple shoes, and the folder in her hand. It was only a moment, but it was enough. Ethan noticed it. He had spent years fixing things, and he knew the first sign of damage was often something small. A strange sound, a loose connection, a crack nobody wanted to see. "She is waiting for a meeting," Melissa explained. Adrian looked at Clara. "With whom?" Clara answered simply, "The board." Adrian gave a polite smile that did not reach his eyes. "The board has a very full schedule today." The lobby became quiet, the kind of quiet where everyone waited to see who would be respected and who would be dismissed. Ethan continued organizing his tools nearby, but he listened. Clara did not argue. She did not demand special treatment. She simply stood there and accepted the moment with a calmness that seemed unusual. "I can wait," she said. Adrian studied her for a second. "I am sure you understand that security and scheduling exist for a reason." Clara nodded. "Ido." Those 2 words seemed simple, but Ethan noticed something. She was not embarrassed. She was disappointed. There was a difference. The receptionist quietly pointed toward the seating area. "You can wait there until we confirm your appointment." Clara walked toward the chairs near the window. Rain continued sliding down the glass behind her, making the city outside look distant and blurred. Ethan approached after a few minutes. "The heating in that corner is weak," he said. "I can move a small heater closer if you want." Clara looked at him with surprise. "You are still helping me?" Ethan looked confused. "Why would I stop?" She lowered her eyes for a moment. "Most people change how they treat someone when they think they know their importance." Ethan adjusted the strap on his toolbox. "That seems like a difficult way to live." A small smile appeared on Clara's face. "You have an interesting way of looking at things." "I just fix what I see," Ethan replied. "Broken equipment, cold rooms, problems people ignore." Clara looked around the lobby. Her eyes briefly moved toward Adrian, who was speaking quietly with the receptionist. "Maybe some things are harder to repair." Ethan did not answer immediately. He looked at the building around them, the polished floors, the expensive decorations, the people walking quickly without looking at anyone. "Sometimes," he said, "the hardest things to fix are the things people pretend are not broken." Clara remembered those words. Before she could respond, Melissa returned holding a company file. Her face had lost its professional calm. "Mr. Cole?" she called softly. Adrian turned. "Yes." Melissa lowered her voice. "I need to speak with you privately." Ethan watched from a distance as Adrian opened the file. His confident expression changed slightly. Just slightly, but enough for Ethan to notice. Inside that folder was something Adrian did not expect to see. Something connected to Clara Whitmore. Something that could change the entire meeting waiting upstairs. And as the elevator doors opened for the board members arriving that morning, nobody in the lobby realized the balance of power had already begun to shift. The elevator doors closed slowly, carrying the board members toward the upper floors, while the tension in the lobby remained behind like a storm waiting to arrive. Ethan Walker returned to his maintenance cart, but he could not ignore the feeling that something important had shifted. He had spent years working inside Whitmore Holdings, and he knew the difference between a normal problem and one that people tried to hide. The conversation between Adrian Cole and Melissa Grant had lasted less than a minute, yet Adrian walked away with a different expression. The confidence was still there, but something underneath it had changed. Clara remained seated near the window, holding the worn folder against her coat. She watched employees pass by, each person moving with purpose, each person too busy to notice the woman who had been standing outside in the rain moments earlier. Ethan approached with a small cup of coffee. "I hope this is okay," he said. "The machine downstairs makes terrible coffee, but it is warm." Clara looked at the cup and smiled gently. "You do this for everyone?" Ethan shook his head. "Only people who look like they need it." She looked at him carefully. "You still do not know who I am." Ethan sat the coffee on the table.
No.
"But I know how people should be treated." For a moment, Clara said nothing. She had spent years surrounded by people who knew her name before they knew her. They opened doors because of her family. They smiled because of her position. But this man had offered kindness before knowing anything. Upstairs, inside the executive conference room, Adrian placed the folder on the long wooden table. Several board members looked toward him. "There is a situation downstairs," he said. "A woman arrived claiming she has a meeting with the board." One of the directors frowned. "Claiming?" Adrian nodded. "She has no assistant, no official appointment confirmation, and no identification that matches our current visitor schedule." Melissa stood near the doorway, uncomfortable. "Mr. Cole, I think there may be more to this." Adrian looked at her. "More?" Melissa opened the file she had carried upstairs. The visitor signature. The room became quiet. She placed a copy of the visitor log on the table. "I recognized the handwriting." One board member leaned closer. "From where?" Melissa took a breath. "From the archived documents of the original Whitmore family records." Adrian remained still. "That is impossible." "I thought so too," Melissa replied, "until I compared the signatures." Downstairs, Clara finished her coffee and looked toward Ethan. "You have worked here a long time?" she asked. "Almost 8 years. And you never wanted more?" Ethan smiled slightly. "I want enough." Clara looked surprised. "Enough?" Ethan nodded. "Enough time with my daughter. Enough money to pay the bills. Enough peace to sleep at night." The answer stayed with her. It was simple, but it carried something she rarely found in powerful rooms. Contentment. Before Clara could say anything else, the lobby doors opened. A security manager entered with 2 employees following behind him. Ethan noticed immediately. "Is everything all right?" the manager asked Clara. She stood calmly. "I believe so." The manager looked at Ethan. "Did you authorize this visitor access?" Ethan understood the question. He understood what was happening. They were not asking because they needed information. They were looking for someone to blame. "I gave her a towel," Ethan said. "I did not change any security procedure." The manager nodded slowly. "Still, we need to document everything." Clara looked at Ethan. "You could have walked away." Ethan looked confused. "From what?" "From helping me." He paused. "Why would I?" That answer surprised her more than anything else that happened that morning. Because in a building where everyone was waiting to know her name before showing respect, Ethan had done the opposite. He had shown respect first. Then the elevator doors opened again. Adrian stepped into the lobby holding a document folder. The confident smile was gone. He looked directly at Clara. For the first time that day, everyone noticed the change in his expression. "Ms. Whitmore," he said quietly. The lobby froze. Clara stood slowly. Ethan looked between them, realizing that the name everyone had ignored was not just a name. It was a key. And Adrian Cole had just revealed that he knew exactly who was standing in front of him. The lobby fell into a silence that felt heavier than the rain outside. For several seconds, nobody moved. The receptionist stopped typing. The security manager lowered the clipboard in his hands. Even the employees walking through the entrance slowed down, sensing that something important had changed. Clara Whitmore stood calmly near the window, her old coat still damp from the storm, while Adrian Cole looked at her as if he had just seen a chapter of history walk back into the building. "Ms. Whitmore," Adrian repeated, this time more carefully. Clara looked at him. "Mr. Cole." The way she said his name carried no anger.
No accusation.
Just recognition. Ethan watched quietly from beside his maintenance cart. He did not understand every detail, but he understood people. He noticed Adrian was no longer speaking like a person in control. He was speaking like someone trying to protect something. "I apologize for the confusion," Adrian said. His professional smile returned, but it looked different now, more carefully placed. "We were not expecting your arrival." Clara held the folder against her side. "That seems to be the problem." Adrian glanced around the lobby. "Perhaps we should discuss this upstairs." Clara did not move immediately. Instead, she looked toward Ethan. "Before we do that, I want to make something clear." Everyone turned slightly. "This man helped me when nobody else did." Ethan looked uncomfortable with the attention. "I only gave her a towel." Clara nodded. "Exactly. You saw a person before you saw a position." Those words stayed in the air. Adrian looked toward Ethan for a brief moment. It was not anger. It was calculation. The kind of look from someone realizing an unnoticed witness had been present during an important moment. "Mr. Walker," Adrian said politely, "you understand company procedures must be followed." Ethan nodded. "Yes, sir. And visitors cannot simply be allowed into restricted areas." Ethan looked confused. "I did not allow her into restricted areas. She was waiting in the lobby." Melissa, the board secretary's assistant, quietly stepped forward. "That is correct. She never passed security." Adrian looked at her. "Thank you, Melissa." His voice remained calm, but his eyes became sharper. "We will review everything later." Ethan recognized that sentence. He had heard versions of it many times. It was the sentence people used when they wanted a conversation to disappear. Clara noticed too. She looked toward the security desk. "Was there a problem with my arrival?" The security manager hesitated. "No, ma'am. We were simply following procedure." Clara nodded slowly. "Procedure is important." She looked around the lobby. "But sometimes people use procedure to avoid responsibility." Nobody answered. The rain continued tapping against the glass walls. Upstairs, the board meeting waited. But before Clara entered the elevator, Melissa approached her quietly. "May I ask you something?" Clara turned. "Of course." Melissa lowered her voice. "Why did you come here without announcing yourself?" Clara looked at the company logo engraved into the marble wall. "Because I needed to know what this company had become when nobody knew I was watching." Melissa looked down. She understood. 4 years, Whitmore Holdings had carried the name of Clara's family. But names could become decorations if people forgot the values behind them. Ethan picked up his toolbox and prepared to return to work. Clara noticed. "Mr. Walker." He stopped. "Yes. Thank you." Ethan nodded. "You are welcome. You still do not want to know why everyone changed when they heard my name?" Ethan thought for a moment. "I think I already know." Clara looked surprised. "What do you mean?" Ethan closed his toolbox. "People sometimes treat a name differently than they treat a person." That answer stayed with her. It was simple, honest, difficult to argue with. The elevator doors opened. Adrian stepped inside first, followed by Melissa and Clara. Before the doors closed, Clara looked back at Ethan one more time. He was already returning to his work, checking a maintenance panel near the wall as if nothing unusual had happened. But something unusual had happened. The person with the least power in the building had shown the most character. And upstairs, inside a room full of executives, a single question was waiting to be answered. If Clara Whitmore was truly who the records suggested she was, then why had nobody been told she was coming back? The elevator moved upward slowly, carrying Clara Whitmore toward the room where decisions worth millions of dollars were made every day. But for the first time in years, she was not thinking about numbers, contracts, or business strategies. She was thinking about a man in a maintenance uniform who had offered her a towel without knowing her name. Upstairs, the boardroom was quiet. A long glass table reflected the city lights outside, and the executives sat waiting for answers. Adrian Cole stood at the front of the room, his hands resting on the table. He looked prepared, but the confidence he carried downstairs had become more careful. "Before we begin," Adrian said, "I think we should address the unexpected arrival this morning." Clara entered the room. Every person turned. Some recognized her immediately. Others looked confused, trying to understand why someone they had never seen before was receiving so much attention. Clara walked to the empty chair at the end of the table. She did not sit at the head. She did not demand recognition. She simply placed her folder down. "Good morning," she said. "I believe there are some things we need to discuss." One of the older board members adjusted his glasses. "Ms. Whitmore, if you are who we believe you are, then we need confirmation." Clara nodded. "That is reasonable." She opened her folder and removed a small document envelope. But before she could hand it over, Adrian spoke. "There is no need to create unnecessary confusion. We can verify everything through proper channels." Clara looked at him. "That is exactly what I am asking for." The room became still. Adrian smiled politely. "Of course." But the way he said it revealed something. He wanted control over the process. Clara noticed. So did Melissa. The board secretary's assistant placed the visitor log copy on the table. "There is another matter," Melissa said. Everyone looked at her. The signature from the lobby. She placed the document beside Clara's folder. "I compared it with archived records from the original company documents." One executive leaned forward. "And?" Melissa took a breath. "The match is extremely close." Adrian immediately responded. "Close is not confirmation." Melissa nodded. "Correct. That is why I requested access to the original ownership records." A few seconds passed. The room remained quiet. Then a digital archive appeared on the screen. Old company documents, founder agreements, ownership transfers. The history of Whitmore Holdings appeared one page at a time. Clara watched silently. She knew this moment was not about proving she had money. She knew what was truly being tested. Trust. At the bottom of the screen was a document that changed the atmosphere in the room. The original inheritance agreement. The name connected to the controlling ownership rights was visible. Clara Whitmore. Nobody spoke. Adrian looked at the screen, then at Clara. "You planned this." Clara shook her head. "No. I observed." She looked around the table. "There is a difference." One board member looked uncomfortable. "Why did you come without informing us?" Clara answered honestly. "Because information changes behavior." The room stayed silent. If everyone knew I was coming, I would have seen prepared smiles, careful words, and perfect manners. She looked toward the window. "I wanted to see what happened when nobody expected anything from me." The words carried weight, because everyone in that room knew the answer. Downstairs, a woman in a worn coat had been treated like an inconvenience. Upstairs, that same woman held the future of the company in her hands. But Clara was not focused on punishment. She was focused on understanding. "There is one more thing I want reviewed," she said. Adrian looked up. "What?" Clara opened another file. "The security procedures in the lobby." Adrian became still. "Why?" Clara answered calmly. "Because a company shows its true values in the moments when nobody important is watching." She remembered Ethan standing in the rain with a towel in his hand. No questions. No assumptions. Just kindness. Meanwhile, inside the boardroom, the first layer of the truth had been uncovered. But one question remained unanswered. Why had Clara's return been hidden from the company records? And who had benefited from keeping the rightful owner away? The question remained in the room long after Clara Whitmore finished speaking. Who had benefited from keeping the rightful owner away? Nobody answered immediately. The glass walls of the boardroom reflected the city below, but inside that room, every person was looking at the same documents on the screen. The truth was no longer hidden behind assumptions. Adrian Cole adjusted the papers in front of him and spoke carefully. "Ms. Whitmore, I think we need to be cautious before making conclusions based on incomplete information." Clara looked at him calmly. "I agree. That is why we are reviewing the facts." Her response was simple, but it changed the balance of the conversation. She was not accusing. She was not demanding. She was asking for evidence. And evidence was something nobody could easily ignore. Melissa opened another file on her tablet. I found something else, she said. The ownership transfer records were updated 3 years ago, but the internal announcement was never distributed to the full company. Several board members exchanged looks. Who approved that? One director asked. Melissa checked the record. The approval came from the executive office. The room became quiet again. Adrian leaned back slightly. There were administrative reasons. We were handling a sensitive transition. Clara looked at him. A transition that removed my name from company communication? Adrian remained composed. A transition that protected stability. Clara nodded slowly. Stability is important, but stability built on incomplete information is not the same as trust. Downstairs, Ethan Walker continued his work without knowing what was happening above him. He repaired a small issue with the lobby lighting, checked the maintenance schedule, and prepared for the rest of his shift. For him, the morning had already happened. He had helped someone who needed help. That was all. But then his phone rang. It was the building manager. Ethan, can you come to the lobby? Ethan looked at the clock. Is something wrong? Just come down when you can. The tone made him pause. When Ethan returned to the lobby, he saw the security manager, the receptionist, and 2 employees standing near the entrance. The atmosphere felt different. Not hostile, just uncomfortable. Ethan, the security manager said, we need to review what happened earlier. Ethan nodded. Okay. The manager held a clipboard. A concern was raised that you allowed an unauthorized visitor special access. Ethan looked confused. She stayed in the public lobby. Yes, but you interacted with her. Ethan waited. I gave her a towel because she was wet from the rain. The receptionist looked down. She knew that was true. The security manager continued. We are simply documenting the situation. Ethan understood. He had seen enough workplaces to know when documentation was being used as protection instead of understanding. Still, he stayed calm. I understand. Then a voice came from behind them. There is no need to question him. Everyone turned. Clara stood at the entrance with Melissa beside her. Ethan looked surprised. Ms. Whitmore. Clara walked closer. Mr. Walker did nothing wrong. The security manager straightened. We were only following procedure. Clara nodded. Procedure matters. But so does judgment. She looked at Ethan. He helped me before he knew my name. Nobody spoke. That sentence carried more meaning than any title or position. Ethan looked uncomfortable with the attention. I just did what anyone should do. Clara smiled slightly. That is exactly why it matters. The security manager lowered his clipboard. The receptionist looked embarrassed. The people who had ignored Clara earlier were now seeing the moment differently. But Clara was not finished. She turned toward the security desk. I would like to review the lobby camera recording from this morning. Adrian had warned everyone to be careful with conclusions. Clara agreed. That was why she wanted proof. The truth would not come from opinions. It would come from what actually happened. The camera footage was requested. The room waited, because somewhere inside that recording was the answer to a bigger question. Not just how Clara had been treated, but who inside the company had created a system where kindness was questioned and suspicion was rewarded. The lobby camera blinked softly above the entrance, quietly recording the moment that would later change everything. For years, that camera had been there to protect the building, to document arrivals, departures, and ordinary routines. Nobody expected that one ordinary morning would reveal something much bigger than a security issue. Ethan Walker stood near the security desk with his hands resting calmly at his sides. He was not nervous because he knew what he had done. He had offered a towel. He had offered warmth. He had treated someone like a person. Clara Whitmore stood beside him, watching the security team prepare the recording. We will review the footage from the beginning, Clara said. Not just the moment someone noticed a problem. The security manager nodded and pulled up the file. The screen showed the front entrance. The timestamp appeared. The rain outside was heavy. Employees moved through the lobby carrying coffee cups, briefcases, and umbrellas. Then Clara appeared on the screen. She stood outside the glass doors for several moments before entering. The recording showed everything. The way she hesitated before opening the door. The way she looked around, unsure where to go. The way the receptionist immediately focused on her appearance before asking about her purpose. Nobody spoke. The footage continued. Clara explained that she had a meeting. The receptionist asked for confirmation. Clara calmly responded. Then came the moment Ethan walked into view. He was carrying his maintenance cart. He noticed her wet coat. He noticed the rainwater on the floor. He did not notice a title. He did not notice a family name. He simply noticed someone who needed help. The camera showed him offering the towel. It showed Clara accepting it with surprise. It showed Ethan returning to his work without expecting anything. Melissa watched the screen carefully. "That is important," she whispered. Adrian, who had entered the lobby during the review, remained silent. "What is important?" he asked. Melissa looked at him. "The order of events." She pointed toward the screen. "He helped her before anyone knew who she was." Clara looked at Ethan. He gave a small nod, almost uncomfortable with the attention. "It was not a big thing," he said. Clara replied quietly, "Sometimes the smallest things reveal the biggest truths." The recording continued. Showed the receptionist and security team discussing whether Clara belonged inside the building. It showed the hesitation. It showed the assumptions. Then it showed Adrian arriving. The room became quieter. Everyone watched his reaction on the screen. His expression changed when he recognized Clara. The security manager looked uncomfortable. "We did not know," he said. Clara turned toward him. "That is the point." Her voice remained calm. Respect should not depend on knowing. Nobody argued, because the recording did not show anger. It did not show a misunderstanding. It showed choices. Small choices made in small moments. Melissa opened another file connected to the visitor system. "There is something else." She looked at the screen. The system recorded an attempted adjustment to the visitor log after the fact. Adrian immediately looked at her. "What?" Melissa continued. "A digital note was added after Ms. Whitmore entered. It changed the description of her visit." Clara looked at the screen. "Changed it to what?" Melissa read the entry. "Unverified visitor. Possible access concern." Ethan looked confused. "But she was already verified later." Melissa nodded. "Exactly." The room grew still. The problem was no longer just about a misunderstanding in the lobby. It was about how the company recorded people before knowing the truth. Adrian stepped forward. "We need to be careful with assumptions." Clara looked at him. "I agree." She paused. "That is why we are looking at records." Her words were calm, but they carried weight. Evidence was building. The camera showed actions. The visitor log showed changes. The timeline showed what happened and when it happened. No accusations were needed. The facts were beginning to speak for themselves. Ethan looked at Clara. "I hope this does not cause trouble for anyone." She studied him for a moment. "Why would you say that?" Ethan shrugged. "Because sometimes people make mistakes." Clara nodded slowly. "That is true." She looked back at the screen. But mistakes are different from systems that teach people to stop caring. Outside, the rain continued falling against the glass walls. Inside the lobby, everyone understood. Something had changed. The question was no longer whether Clara Whitmore belonged in the building. The question was who had decided some people did not belong before they ever had a chance to be heard. The silence after the camera review was different from the silence before. Earlier, people had been uncertain. Now, they were uncomfortable because the facts were becoming impossible to ignore. The screen in the lobby showed what happened. The visitor records showed what changed. The timeline showed that Ethan Walker had done nothing wrong. He had simply offered kindness before anyone knew Clara Whitmore's name. Clara stood near the security desk, looking at the information in front of her. She did not appear satisfied by being proven right. She looked thoughtful, almost disappointed. "A company is not defined by what it says in a meeting room," she said quietly. It is defined by what happens when nobody expects to be rewarded. Adrian Cole remained composed, but his careful expression was beginning to reveal the pressure underneath. I understand your concern, Ms. Whitmore. However, we should not make a judgment based on one incident. Clara nodded. I agree. One incident is not enough. She turned toward Melissa. That is why I want to see the complete record. Melissa opened the internal system, the visitor policies, the security guidelines, the approval history. One by one, the documents appeared. First, everything looked normal. Procedures, forms, standard rules. But then Melissa found something unusual. There is a pattern, she said. Everyone looked toward her. A number of visitor entries were flagged over the past year using similar descriptions. Adrian glanced at the screen. That is part of security management. Melissa shook her head slightly. Not exactly. The flags were not based on behavior. They were based on appearance, arrival method, or lack of immediate identification. Clara looked at the screen carefully. The words were professional. The language was polished. But the meaning was clear. People had been judged before they were understood. Ethan stood quietly nearby. He remembered the morning, the woman in the rain, the hesitation at the door, the way people looked at her before hearing her story. This is not about one person, Clara said. It is about a habit. Adrian crossed his arms. A habit that kept this company safe. Clara looked at him. Safety matters. But suspicion without reason becomes something else. The room became quiet again. Melissa continued reviewing the records. There is another issue. She opened a separate document. Several policy updates were approved by the executive office without full board review. One director leaned forward. Who authorized those changes? Melissa looked at the approval history. The acting executive office. Nobody needed to ask who that meant. Adrian remained calm. Those updates were temporary. Clara looked at him. Temporary decisions can still create permanent consequences. Downstairs, Ethan looked at his watch. His shift was nearly over. He had no interest in the boardroom, the ownership documents, or the decisions of powerful people. He only cared about getting home and making dinner for his daughter. Clara noticed him preparing to leave. Mr. Walker. He stopped. Yes. You are leaving? Ethan nodded. My daughter gets home soon. Clara smiled slightly. You have not asked for anything. Ethan looked confused. Should I? She looked at him for a moment. Most people would. Ethan picked up his toolbox. I helped someone because she needed help. That does not become more valuable because of who she is. Clara remembered those words. They were the same reason she had noticed him in the first place. He measured value differently than everyone else in the building. Not by wealth. Not by status. By actions. Before Ethan reached the elevator, Adrian's assistant entered the lobby carrying another folder. Mr. Cole, he said quietly, we found something regarding the ownership records. Adrian turned immediately. The assistant continued, there is an archived document connected to the original founder agreement. Clara looked toward the folder. Melissa stepped closer. What kind of document? The assistant hesitated. A document that explains why Ms. Whitmore's return was never announced. The lobby became still once again. Because the question had changed. It was no longer only about how people treated a stranger. It was about who had worked to keep the rightful owner away from the company she was meant to lead. And inside that folder was the answer everyone had been avoiding. The folder sat on the security desk for only a few seconds, but it felt as if the entire building was waiting for someone to open it. Outside, the rain continued falling against the glass walls of Whitmore Holdings. The same rain that had brought Clara Whitmore into the building that morning. But now nobody was looking at her coat. Nobody was questioning why she was there. Everyone was focused on the truth hidden inside the documents. Adrian Cole looked at the folder carefully. Where did this come from? He asked. His assistant answered quietly. The Archived Records Department. It was marked as restricted company history. Melissa reached for the folder. Why would the founder agreement be restricted? Nobody answered. Clara opened it slowly. Inside were copies of original company documents, signed agreements, and internal communications from years earlier. The first pages showed the history of Whitmore Holdings. The company had been built on a simple principle written by Clara's grandfather. Trust before profit. People before appearances. Clara read those words silently. She had heard them many times as a child, but seeing them now inside a company that had changed so much felt different. Melissa turned another page. Then she stopped. There is something here. Everyone looked toward her. She pointed at a section of the document. The controlling ownership rights were transferred to Clara Whitmore after the passing of the founder's previous successor. One director looked confused. That transfer was never announced? Melissa shook her head. No official announcement exists. Adrian remained quiet. Clara looked at him. Why? Adrian took a moment before answering. There were concerns about timing. Clara waited. What concerns? He looked around the room. The company was facing uncertainty. Investors wanted stability. A sudden leadership change could have created problems. Clara nodded slowly. So the decision was made to keep my return private. Adrian did not deny it. Temporarily. For 3 years. Clara asked. The room became silent. 3 years was not temporary. Not in a company. Not in a position of trust. Melissa continued searching through the records. There is more. She opened another file. Several internal messages mention concerns about public perception. Clara read the screen. The language was carefully written. Professional. Polite. But the meaning was clear. There had been discussions about whether Clara's leadership would be accepted because she had stepped away from the company for years. Adrian looked toward her. Those conversations were about protecting the company. Clara closed the file. Or protecting certain positions. Nobody responded. The truth did not need a louder voice. It only needed enough evidence. Ethan had already left the lobby, unaware that the kindness he showed had become part of a much bigger discussion. On his way home, he stopped at a small grocery store to buy ingredients for dinner. His life had not changed. He was still the same father who checked his schedule carefully, who saved money when he could, who made sure his daughter had everything she needed. He did not know that his simple choice that morning had reminded powerful people of something they had forgotten. Back at the building, Clara returned her attention to the documents. I want every communication related to these decisions reviewed. Adrian looked surprised. You are starting an investigation? Clara shook her head. I am starting a review. Her words were calm. There is a difference. She looked around the room. I do not want revenge. I want understanding. Melissa nodded. That was the difference between someone seeking power and someone carrying responsibility. Before the meeting continued, Clara asked one final question. Who approved the visitor policies that allowed employees to judge people before knowing their purpose? Melissa searched the records again. The answer appeared. The approval signature belonged to Adrian Cole. The room became completely silent. Adrian looked at the document. Then he looked at Clara. Those policies were never intended to harm anyone. Clara nodded. Intent matters, but impact matters too. The evidence was no longer about a single morning in the lobby. It was about a pattern built from small choices, small assumptions, small moments where people were valued less because they looked ordinary. And now, with the records, the signatures, and the timeline connected, the final question remained. Would Adrian accept the truth and change the system? Or would he continue defending the decisions that had brought the company to this moment?